Another sign of changing times, the White House spokesman emphasized today how well the talks had gone between Mr. Bush and Mr. Gorbachev. But he also pointed out that if any American loans were made to the Soviet Union, they would be made to individual republics as well as to the central government. The republics would also be held accountable for paying them back. Also on the broadcast tonight, the further killing today in the Middle East. The Palestinians here in Madrid standing out in the crowd. And we'll have a report from California on teenage abortion. Must there always be parental consent? We'll be back from Madrid in just a moment. This conference is necessary. 2 Jewish settlers who died when their bus was attacked last night were buried. And 3 Israeli soldiers were killed in that portion of Lebanon occupied by the Israeli army. Here's ABC's Don Kladstrup.
Israeli forces combed the hills of southern Lebanon after guerrillas set off a roadside bomb which killed the 3 soldiers. Senior officers were convinced the attack was timed to coincide with the Madrid peace conference. In a separate incident, at least 2 guerrillas were killed in a firefight with Israeli soldiers.
Their aim it was to enter to one of our villages and to try to kill and to damage civilian life in this area.
Civilians weren't taking any chances either, patrolling in case of further attacks, the kind that caused this outpouring of grief in the West Bank Jewish settlement of Shiloh. The tears were for 2 victims, killed last night when terrorists fired on a bus filled with Jewish settlers. Few, if any, here believe the Madrid conference will end that kind of violence. If anything, it has brought into sharper focus the daily conflicts between Jew and Arab. In Gaza, a demonstration supporting the peace conference degenerated into rock throwing against Israeli soldiers. In another part of Gaza, residents waved olive branches as a gesture of peace. On the West Bank, Israeli soldiers also carried olive branches, but for a different reason: security. They were clearing a grove where the shots were fired last night at the Israeli bus, where today Jewish settlers moved in and called on the government to establish a new settlement. Don Kladstrup, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
Not very far from where those Jewish settlers want to make a permanent statement, a group of Palestinians goes on wondering if their temporary circumstances will ever end. ABC's SHEILA McVicar is over on the east bank of the Jordan River at a Palestinian refugee camp near the Jordanian capital, Amman.
At the Baka camp for Palestinian refugees, they have heard of conferences and plans for peace before. Like ITZHAK, they have instead lived through wars. Few have any hope the Madrid talks or anything that comes from them will change their lives. It's going to be a failure, 100%, he says. In spite of ITZHAK's cynicism, peace is a big dream here. Most of the camp's 100,000 Palestinians believe peace would help them escape Baka's squalid conditions and 30% unemployment. The families who live here now lost their homes in the 1948 War of Israeli Independence. They were finally brought to Baka in 1967 and found a mud field with tents. The United Nations and the Palestinians still call this camp temporary, and they have made rules that keep the people in a permanent state of waiting. For example, houses are called shelters, and it is even forbidden to add a second story. To build a second story here would be to say that Baka is no longer a temporary camp, but a community. And that would be to admit that the people who live here will never go back to the land they still call home. Minwar Aude was a farmer in Beersheba, which is now in Israel. 3 generations of his family, 35 people, live in 5 rooms. His children and grandchildren have never seen Palestine. It is kept alive for them in stories. Alam was born in Jordan, but it is Palestine she calls home.
We love Palestine because it was our home, our parents' home. I will never leave this camp, never let my children leave, but to go back there.
The Audes are poor. Alam's mother earns a little money sewing clothes, and the men in the family earn what they can as day laborers.
I had hoped for something better than this.
The Aude family, like the others here, has been granted Jordanian citizenship and could leave. In spite of the bad conditions, Minwar Aude says he stays in the camp because that is how he holds on to his dream.
We want peace, so we can live with the Israelis under one roof in the same country. We want to go back home.
But home is now in Israel. The Palestinians of VICAR say a just peace must include them. Any peace that does not, they say they will fight. SHEILA McVicker, ABC News, VICAR.
I'll have a final note from here in Madrid a little later. And in a moment, Diane Sawyer with some of the day's other news.